The moon hung high in the sky, a silver sliver casting shadows over the worn wooden barn. In the stillness of the night, the air felt electric. It was one of those nights when the truth of a quiet farm could shatter a farm squatting in the countryside, draped in secrets. Unbeknownst to the world, danger was lurking close, just beyond the wooden fence. In the shrouded darkness, a pair of figures crept silently across the dew-coated grass. Clad in dark clothing, they moved with practiced ease, eyes sharp and hearts racing. Their breaths fogged in the chill of the night, barely breaking the heavy silence around them. But tonight was different. This wasn't just a robbery, they were after something they believed could change everything, something worth the risk. Tommy, the lead of the duo, whispered through clenched teeth, "This is it." He glanced back, meeting the eyes of his partner, Liz. She nodded, her face a mask of determination blended with anxiety. They were only here to steal a few machines-old relics that nobody cared about but could fetch a good price at the right market. Little did they know, the man whose land they tread upon was not just an ordinary farmer. He was a man of quiet strength who had spent years watching the world from his perch in the countryside. Inside the farmhouse, a single light glowed warmly, illuminating the rugged lines of the wooden tables and walls adorned with pictures from a life well lived. George the farmer sat in his worn-out chair, his calloused hands cradling a steaming mug of coffee. He had just returned from a long day at the fields, and though exhaustion tugged at his eyelids, he felt an unsettling whisper in his gut, a sixth sense honed from years of living close to the land. He acknowledged the oddity of feeling on edge on a night like this. The world should have been peacefully asleep, but history was heavy on George's shoulders. There had been whispers in town, rumors of thieves scouting properties, searching for easy targets. He had tightened his grip on the tools of his trade, but it wasn't just the tools that mattered. His family history was embedded in this farm, and watching it threaten sent a shiver through his spine. Rising from his chair, he poured himself one last cup of coffee, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. Tommy and Liz crouched low against the old barn, their hearts pounding in tandem. They exchanged nervous glances, both aware that the stakes were higher than just theft. "Just a few machines," Tommy whispered again, almost as if repeating the mantra would somehow soothe their racing minds. With one last glance toward the farmhouse, they slipped silently into the barn, the towering structure echoing with a sense of looming dread. Inside, the air was musty, tinged with the smell of hay and rusted metal. As they moved to navigate the shadows, their flashlight beams danced across the barren space before resting on faded machinery and cobweb-covered tools. Victory was just within reach, a rusty tractor that could be their ticket, its motors still alive from the echoes of work it had once known. But as they prepared to lift the tractor and load it onto the waiting van, an unexpected sound punctured the quiet, the creak of an old floorboard. Time froze, fear slithering up their spines. Someone was watching. Outside, George had his shotgun firmly in hand. He didn't want to reach for his weapon, but when danger loomed, instinct took over. The creak had filled the still atmosphere, and in that moment, the weight of generations hung in the air. He stepped into the shadows, the night wrapping around him like a cloak. The contrasting worlds of predator and prey collided. George peered through a small window overlooking the barn. The silhouettes moved closer to the tractor, oblivious to the storm brewing outside. Anger bubbled within him. These weren't the first thieves to try their luck on his land, and they wouldn't be the last. But being caught off guard was not an option. With deft movements, George positioned himself while channeling the spirit of his ancestors, the ones who had tilled this land and faced far graver challenges. He had always believed that knowledge was power, and instinct was no different. Listening to the stillness of the night amplified his senses like a tuning fork. Tommy pulled on the throttle, and the old machine roared to life, its sound thunderous in the stillness. A confident grin crept across his face, but it quickly dissolved as the headlights of a vehicle suddenly swept through the barn doors. Panic flashed in his eyes, and he turned to Liz. But the world outside wasn't what they thought. George had strategically parked his truck, its headlights creating an impenetrable wall of light between them and the exit. The realization hit Liz like a bucket of ice water. This was a trap, and they had walked right into it. "Think, Tommy," she hissed, her voice trembling. They rushed toward a back exit, but something shifted in the shadows. The air grew thick with dread. "This way," George's voice came out of nowhere, startling both intruders. Liz spun on her heels, heart racing as she locked eyes with the rugged silhouette of the farmer. Tommy blustered, feigning bravado even as he stepped back. "Trouble has already found you," George replied steadily, his grip on the shotgun firm but steady. He wasn't just some simple farmer, he was a protector of what mattered. The stakes were higher than machines. This was about respect, history, and the very roots that had grown in the soil beneath their feet. With their intentions laid bare, the tension cracked like thunder, and in that heartbeat, each player was forced to make a choice. The echo of George's steel resolve drowned out the noise of the world. He was there standing tall, not just as a man, but as a guardian of his legacy. George asked, his voice calm but filled with a storm's energy. "You're not just here for machinery." Something flickered in Tommy's eyes, a mix of desperation and fear. "We thought we could change our lives. Just one night and we'd be set." The truth held weight. In moments of desperation, people could weave themselves into corners of life they never intended to see. George felt a pang of empathy, the kind sparked by the understanding of struggle. "Listen," George continued, lowering his gun slightly. "Everyone has a story, but there's a line you don't cross." In that charged silence, Tommy and Liz exchanged frantic glances, grappling internally with their choices. The night had confronted them with reality. They were thieves in a world where every choice came with a price. Liz shouted suddenly, her fear morphing into anger. She lunged toward George, but he was prepared. With instincts forged from years of resilience, George stepped aside, redirecting her energy, his experience working against her impulsiveness. In one swift movement, he had her pinned against the barn wall, showcasing the power of not just his physical strength, but also his knowledge of the land and its traditions of hard work. "Don't make this worse," he said, voice low but insistent. Tommy was frozen, caught between fear and the desperation to protect Liz. But here at the end of their plan, with their cover blown, the fight now lay entirely in George's hands. Liz fumed, struggling against his grasp. "No," George replied, still unwavering, "I won't let you ruin your chance at redemption." The air shifted again, tension thick enough to cut. Tommy finally broke the silence. "Walk away," George replied. "You're not criminals, you're desperate. There's a difference." The barrier between them disintegrated, replacing violence with vulnerability. It was as if George's steadfastness inspired a flicker of lucidity in both Tommy and Liz. They saw not just a farmer, but a man who had fought hard, who understood the weight of loss and the struggle that trails hurdles onward. As they stood in the shadows of the barn, their world expanded, enveloped by the warmth of possibility rather than anger. The fight was no longer against George. The true battle rested within them, a silent choice beckoning them to listen. "None of this is easy," George continued, his voice steady, "but change doesn't have to begin with a decision forged in shame." With those words, the gloom dissipated. Tommy lowered his head, and Liz's eyes filled with uncertainty, the fire extinguishing within her. They were indeed two lost souls looking for a desperate way out. George loosened his grip, letting Liz slip away from his hold. It can spark hope. In that defining moment, the narrative shifted. Tommy and Liz's eyes flickered, the weight of their choices allowing empathy to rise like dawn after a long, dark night. They lingered a moment longer, drawn between the choices of life and shadows. Redemption whispered softly, brushing against the fabric of fear that had woven itself around them. "We'll walk away," Tommy said at last, a newfound strength carving out the edges of his voice. With one last meaningful glance at the towering figure of George and the farm that stood testament to resilience, they turned, stepping back under the moonlit sky. The night became less a battleground and more a doorway to possibilities, and with every step they took back toward the gravel road, they understood that the real journey had only just begun. And for George, standing alone in the stillness, the weight of the world lifted a fraction. The dawn would break, carrying the echoes of struggle transformed into understanding, a heart beating as one under the boundless expanse of stars. Hope had found its way into a quiet farm on a moonlit night, turning the tide from desperation to redemption. And in this world, the gentle embrace of empathy held power far greater than theft, weaving lives together with threads of shared humanity. A gust of wind howled across the lonely farm, rattling the old barn doors like a warning bell. Deep in the silence of the night, two silhouettes moved like shadows, slipping through the gaps in the wooden fence. Their hearts raced, anticipation and fear twisting together within them. This was the moment they had planned for weeks, a heist to change everything. But as they crept closer to their target, lurking in the darkness, a storm loomed on the horizon and they had no idea. Inside, the farmhouse stood quiet, though the glow from a single lamp illuminated the sturdy wooden table and faded photographs telling stories of a time well lived. George the farmer sat in his old, well-worn chair, cradling a steaming mug of coffee. It was late and the weight of the day pressed heavily on his shoulders. He should have been asleep, but a sense of unrest tugged at him, a foreboding whisper weaving through the stillness. Tonight was different. He had sensed it since the sun dipped below the horizon. A feeling settled in his gut, honed by years of hard work on this land, years that had taught him to listen. He noticed the small things, the rustle in the bushes, the way the air felt unusually tense. He finished his coffee, staring at the photos, memories of family and friends dancing in his mind. The shadows outside flickered, and as he rose from his chair, he felt a surge of determination. He was not about to let anyone take what belonged to him. Meanwhile, outside the barn, the dude was breathless. Tommy, the leader, glanced over at Liz, his accomplice, their eyes wide with a mix of fear and daring. "This is it," he said, voice low and urgent. "We get in, grab the old tractor, and get out." He believed his own words even as uncertainty crept in. Liz, though nervous, nodded, adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Just a couple of machines. We can do this," she replied, trying to steady her shaking hands. They were here for something that could mean survival, a chance to escape the hole life had dug for them, but they didn't realize how wrong they were. As they stealthily entered the barn, the sense of dread that had settled over the farm thickened. Tommy swung open the door just wide enough for them to slip through, and the damp, musty smell engulfed them. Shadows loomed over the old, rusted machinery, relics of a life filled with hard work and sweat. They just needed to grab the tractor, a vintage beauty that didn't seem worth much to anyone but could fetch a lucrative price. The moment they stepped inside, the barn door creaked ominously behind them, the sound echoing off the walls. They froze, hearts pounding in their chests. Visibility was low, the dim light revealing only glimpses of what surrounded them. It felt like entering a haunted house, each second stretched out, a taut line waiting to snap. "Keep it quiet," Tommy whispered, more to reassure himself than Liz. With steady hands, he flicked the flashlight on, directing the beam onto the horde of dusty equipment surrounding them. But out of the corner of his eye, he caught movement outside, a glimpse of someone standing there, watching. Panic knitted his brow as he turned quickly to check, but the fields were empty. "Must be my imagination," he muttered, brushing it off. Little did he know George was already a step ahead. His instincts had kicked in, drawn tight like a bowstring. He crept through the shadows, gun in hand, careful to make no sound. The weight of the moment pressed on him as he reached the barn, every creak of the wood acting as a countdown. He had faced challenges his entire life, crop failures, weather disasters, and the erosion of time itself. But thieves in the night, this felt different. The barn doors swung open, and a beam of moonlight spilled in, cutting through the darkness as Tommy and Liz moved closer to the tractor. Just then, the old floorboards above creaked, and Liz's heart raced. Her voice barely escaped her lips. "Stay focused," Tommy hissed, trying to drown out the sensation of dread crawling down his spine. But the air had shifted, and the silence now felt like a living thing, something thick and dangerous. As the two of them drew nearer to their prize, George made his move. He stepped inside the barn, silhouetted against the moonlight, his presence electric. Tommy wheeled around, fear transforming his composure into a fumbled mess. He stammered, adrenaline flooding his system as he faced the farmer, a man reeking of authority, unyielding and strong. "You're just trespassing," George growled, the intensity in his voice wrapping around the words like a vice. Liz felt the ground beneath her shift. The giant of a man before them stirred something primal, and she sensed the danger. "Don't want any trouble," she said quickly, her voice shaking but her resolve solid. "We're just looking for some equipment." George stepped closer, each footfall heavy with his history, a history carved from hard labor, honor, and a fierce devotion to this land. Tommy clenched his fists, desperately searching for an escape. He practically shouted, doubt slipping through his bravado. George's eyes softened for a brief moment, a flicker of empathy crossing his rugged features. "I get it, times are tough." For a moment, the tension cracked the air like a thunderstorm brewing on the horizon. Tommy looked at Liz, grappling with the weight of their choices. The adrenaline dissolved, revealing fear and uncertainty. George lowered the gun slightly, sensing a shift. "This farm has a heartbeat. It has a history, a legacy." His voice carried the weight of wisdom, resonating deeply through Liz's soul. Then, as if guided by an unseen force, Tommy stepped forward, vulnerability seeping into his bravado. "I didn't want this," he admitted. "I thought we could make some quick cash and start over." Liz mirrored his hesitation, realizing that their path, fraught with danger and poor decisions, had led them to this very moment, a reckoning that lay bare their desperation and fear. For once, they stood not just as robbers, but as two people caught in life's turmoil, battling their circumstances. "Everything you take has a cost," George said, his gun lowered but not forgotten. "I've lost a lot in my life, but taking from others won't fill the void." Tommy looked into George's eyes, searching for something. "Redemption, maybe?" He started, then hesitated. "Then don't," George replied gently. "You have a chance here to start anew." The truth lingered in the air, heavier than the gun in George's grip. Tommy and Liz stood at a crossroads between darkness and light, despair and hope. They felt the surge of possibility, one that hadn't existed a few moments ago, swallowed whole by a life they didn't want. "Let's just go," Liz said, her voice suddenly steady. "We'll figure something out." Tommy's face was a mixture of disbelief and relief. "Sometimes the hardest choice is also the simplest," George remarked, feeling the weight shift. And slowly, the tension within that barn began to dissolve. The fear that had once filled their hearts faded to something more like hope. The air thick with unspoken possibilities, Liz and Tommy exchanged glances, ready to leave behind the plans that had led them astray. As they crept back toward the door, pulled by an unseen force, George called out, "Remember, this land has been here long before you and will be long after." At that moment, they became more than just thieves. They transformed into two people standing at the edge of a new beginning, one step closer to transforming their lives. "You'll be okay," Liz whispered to Tommy, hope glimmering like the first rays of dawn peeking through the clouds. Outside, the world hummed with a soft, early morning rhythm. As they stepped back into the night, the weight of their choices felt lighter. The moon slipped behind the clouds, the night sky shifting as if to bless their decision. And George, standing alone in the shadows of the barn, felt hope stir within him. The encounter had reminded him of the essence of humanity, the capacity to change, to choose the light even when darkness looms large. Maybe, just maybe, he would have made the same choice if he were in their shoes. With the dawn breaking on the horizon, casting soft golden hues over the fields, he stood watch, still grounded by his love for the land, but emboldened by the possibility that redemption could find its way into even the darkest corners. The night may have been filled with danger, but it had also offered an opportunity, a chance for two lost souls to find their way home. Each heartbeat pulsed a promise, a testament that even within despair, hope can grow stronger. And so, the farmer remained vigilant, standing strong, connected to the land that had taught him life's greatest lessons. Perhaps the best he could do was to allow others to rewrite their stories before dusk fell once more. In that quiet night, with shadows sprawling like old memories, a new tale was born, not just of theft, but of resilience, redemption, and above all, the undeniable power of choice. It was a night like any other on the old farm, the moon casting a ghostly glow over the fields, illuminating the contours of the land, the barn standing silent like a sentinel. But beneath that calm surface, darkness was stirring. Two shadowy figures moved stealthily through the tall grass, blending into the night, hearts pounding with both fear and excitement. Their target, an old tractor, a relic of past labors, tucked deep inside the barn. It wasn't just a piece of machinery, it represented a lifeline they desperately needed. Tommy tightened his grip on the flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. "Stay close," he whispered to Liz, his partner in this high-stakes gamble. Fear flickered in her eyes, but was quickly buried under a layer of determination. They had done their homework, watched the farmer leave for town, and now, in the dead of night, they had a chance to change their fate. Liz followed Tommy, her mind racing through the plans they had made, each detail rehearsed until it felt like second nature. This was the moment, the opportunity they had been waiting for. But as they crept toward the barn's entrance, something unsettled Liz. She could feel it in the air, a tension that prickled at her skin. She asked softly, doubt creeping in. "Of course," Tommy replied, forcing confidence into his voice. "We're almost there." But lurking in that quiet darkness was George, the farmer. Years of rising with the sun, toiling in the fields, and keeping watch over his land had tuned his instincts to a razor's edge. Something was off tonight. He didn't know what, but he could sense it. The stillness was too thick, the air too charged. As he sipped his coffee in the farmhouse, he thought of the whispers he'd heard at the diner just a week before, talk of desperate souls looking to make a quick buck, robbing farms like his. With a sigh, George put down his cup, the old wooden chair creaking under his weight as he stood. He wasn't one to let fear loom over him. He had built this farm with sweat, blood, and unwavering dedication. Protecting it was not just his duty, it was his legacy. As Tommy and Liz slipped inside the barn, George moved silently through the darkened house. The back barn door creaked liplessly as he stepped outside, his breath visible in the chilled night air. He had a plan of his own, one born from instinct and years of hard-won wisdom. Tommy and Liz were in the barn now, surrounded by the ghosts of machinery past, echoes of labor and toil wrapped around them like a shroud. The smell of rust and hay mixed with fear, a pungent reminder of the stakes they faced. Over there, Tommy pointed, excitement sparking in his eyes as he spotted the old tractor, its faded paint a treasure in their minds. But from the shadows, George entered silently, his heart steady, senses keen. The barn felt alive, the structures forming a protective cage around them. Tommy fired up the rusty engine, the roar shattered the silence like thunder. Liz winced, realizing they had just crossed a dangerous line. The noise could wake the entire night. She hissed, panic rising in her throat. But Tommy, too, swept up in the adrenaline, pressed on. It's only for a moment. But as the roar of the engine echoed, George could feel that moment slipping away. He stepped closer, a figure of calm amidst the storm. "You shouldn't be doing this," he said firmly, grounding himself in the present, assessing the situation with clarity. The headlights of the tractor flickered like eyes in the night, illuminating the fear etched on Tommy's face. Tommy stammered, flipping off the engine, the abrupt silence wrapping around them like a blanket. "Not until you understand what you're risking," George replied, standing his ground with a strength that came from years of working the land. "This isn't just about a tractor." Liz's heart raced as she saw the truth in George's eyes. This wasn't just a simple heist, it was a confrontation laden with history and pain. "We're not here to hurt you," she said quickly, stepping forward, voice trembling. George shifted, and in that instant the shadows seemed to whisper as the moments teetered on a knife's edge. "That money won't leave you whole," he declared. Tommy's bravado was fading, the thrill of the heist washing away, replaced by the weight of reality. "We genuinely don't want any trouble." The words hung in the air, heavy with desperation. George could feel their anguish, a reflection of the struggles etched into his own life. He remembered moments when he felt cornered, when the world seemed too big and too unforgiving. "You're not alone in this," he said, his voice softening, echoing layers of understanding. The air crackled with tension as Liz and Tommy exchanged glances, uncertainty crossing their faces. They knew the life they wanted, but tonight had led them down a dark alley. "We thought we could just take what we needed," Liz admitted, her voice quieter now. "But there's always a way out that doesn't involve hurting others," George replied, a warmth creeping into his stern tone. "You're not monsters." Tommy's hands trembled as he stared at the floor, the ground beneath him suddenly heavy with realization. In this man's eyes, he saw the struggles he faced reflected back at him. "I thought." A moment of stillness enveloped them, a hush that deepened as truth illuminated their burdens. "What if," Liz suggested, her heart racing at the idea of fleeing from their plan. Tommy asked, disbelief lacing his words. Sometimes the hardest choice is to turn away from darkness, George encouraged, the shadows behind him flickering like hopeful flames. Caught between the weight of their reality and the flicker of an alternative life, each breath felt monumental. As their resolve teetered, Tommy finally stepped forward, the weight of his decisions crashing down upon him. Absolutely, George said, his voice steady, filled with conviction. It's your life to shape. In that fragile moment, the truth seeped in. A chance for redemption lay within reach. They didn't have to commit to a path of regret. Instead, they could forge a new path, one filled with potential and hope. Liz took a deep breath, exhaling the fear that had clouded her choices. "Let's go," she said, and as she turned towards the door, a flicker of determination ignited within her. Tommy hesitated, but then something in him shifted. Yeah, their feet thundered against the barn floor, echoing off the walls as they raced for the exit, the shadows slowly releasing their grip on their souls. As they stepped outside, the cool night air enveloped them, bracing and alive. Behind them, George remained a figure steadfast against the tide of despair, watching them with a mix of relief and hope. With each step, Tommy and Liz felt the weight lift, the dawn illuminating the darkness that had shown them a glimpse of who they might become. "I hope so," Tommy replied, glancing back at the barn. But even in that hope, they carried the lessons learned that night, a spark ignited in the shadows. As they walked toward the rising sun, that old barn behind them stood like a fortress of potential, reminding them that even in darkness, the possibility of light remained. Inside, George surveyed the vast fields ahead, reaffirming the grip he had on his land. Tonight had tested him, reminded him that even as a farmer, strength often came from seeking understanding, not just defending what is his. And in that quiet night transformed into possibility, a new journey awaited Tommy and Liz, one built not just on survival but on hope. As they ventured into the dawn, a subtle promise fused their paths with a new beginning, just waiting to be unveiled under the tender light of a new day. The night was cloaked in a heavy silver mist. The moon hung low, casting eerie shadows across the quiet farm, where silence thrummed like a taut wire. A pair of figures crept through the expanse of grass, hearts racing in the darkness. There was an urgency in their movements, a desperate hope pulsing through the cool night air. Tommy and Liz were not here for a casual stroll. They were after the old tractor sitting snugly in the barn, an antique gold mine in their eyes. For them, this was not just machinery. It was their ticket to a new life, the means to escape the dead ends that life had dealt them. With each cautious step, they moved closer to what they thought was their salvation. "Just a few moments, then we're out," Tommy whispered, his voice low, yet thick with tension. Liz nodded, biting her lip, her resolve solid. They had been planning this for weeks. It was now or never. But as they neared the barn, the air grew thicker, heavier with a sense of foreboding. Liz paused, feeling an unsettling chill crawl up her spine. She asked, uncertainty creeping into her voice. "We've come too far to turn back now," Tommy pressed, pushing aside her fears with a wave of bravado. He flicked on the flashlight, its beam slicing through the darkness, illuminating their path like a spotlight on a stage. They stepped inside, the barn door creaking ominously behind them, the sound echoing through the night. Inside, the smell of aged wood and rust filled the air like a faint reminder of forgotten labor and broken dreams. Shadows danced across the walls, morphing into shapes that felt alive. Tommy pointed to the tractor, a vintage steel beast that had seen years of toil. "There it is, we'll get it running and then, freedom," he said, the last word spilling from his lips like a spell of liberation. Just then, an unexpected noise shattered the thick tension. A distant creak resonated from above, causing both of them to freeze. Liz's heart thudded violently in her chest. "Don't panic, it's just the old barn settling," Tommy reassured, but doubt swirled in the air like an unwelcome guest. He approached the tractor, but the sense of unease tightened like a noose around them. Meanwhile, in the farmhouse, George, the farmer, lounged in his favorite chair, the light from a single lamp casting gentle shadows around the room. He could sense something off, tension in the fabric of the calm night. It was a feeling he'd honed over years of working this land. He had heard the whispers of desperation echoing through his town, the kind of rumors that seeped into the bones of the community. As he finished his coffee, he remembered a story of a farm nearby that had been robbed only last week. He tried to shake off the dread, but it nestled in his gut like a stone. Getting up from his chair, he decided to check on the barn. He pulled on his jacket, the familiar fabric a comfort against the chill that settled in the air. Each step toward the barn was deliberate. He hadn't built this life to let others take from him without a fight. Tommy leaned closer to the tractor, his hands trembling with excitement and fear. He glanced back at Liz, who was still scanning their surroundings, every creak of the barn setting her nerves alight. "We just need to get this thing out of here," he urged, determination fueling his actions. But outside, George was moving swiftly, a plan taking shape in his mind. He had lived through struggles and heartaches, and he wasn't about to let his legacy be threatened. He reached for the flashlight on the table, determined to shine light on the dark intentions slinking within his barn. As he approached, Tommy finally managed to start the engine. The roar echoed through the silence, startling them both, but it also reverberated outside, catching George's attention. Heart pounding, George moved faster, instincts kicking into high gear. Liz shouted, panic rising in her voice. "It's too late for that," Tommy said, gritting his teeth as the engine sputtered. But there was no turning back now. They were committed, like moths drawn to a flame. George reached the barn, where the sound of the engine bellowed inside. He stood at the door, heart racing, adrenaline rushing through him. He pushed the door open just as Tommy swung out of the barn, the engine's roar seeming to echo off the walls like a siren's call. George's voice sliced through the air, authoritative and unyielding. Tommy froze, heart in his throat, glancing over at Liz. Panic etched her face and fear spread like wildfire through him. Tommy blurted, trying to reclaim control over the situation. "You're stealing from me," George said, his stance unwavering. Liz's breathing quickened. She had never envisioned this moment in their plan. "We don't want any trouble," she pleaded, her voice trembling. George interjected, an edge creeping into his tone. At that moment, the weight of their actions crashed down on them. In that heated exchange, the reality of what they'd done stabbed through their defenses. Tommy and Liz were not just thieves, they were desperate souls crossing a line, blinded by the idea that theft could offer them hope for a better life. "Look, we need this," Tommy stammered, searching for words but finding none. "I thought we could sell it, and you don't know how to start over," George shot back, his voice composed yet charged with emotion. "Trust me, I've tried, but this isn't the way." The moment crackled with tension, pathways of possibility unfolding as the young couple faced an uncertain future. Liz turned to Tommy, eyes wide, the realization of what they were doing now painfully clear. She started, glancing between the two men, her mind scrambling for an escape. Tommy snapped, frustration boiling over. "We're not giving up on this." George stepped forward, his steady gaze locked on Tommy. "What if you don't have to?" For the first time, Tommy felt doubt creep into his heart, a part of him wavering against the weight of George's words. Perhaps there was wisdom in that steady presence, something he had yet to consider. Liz asked, her voice barely above a whisper, uncertainty weighing her down. "Because I know what it feels like to be desperate. I've been there," George replied, his voice softer now, like the fading light of the setting sun. In that charged moment, the dynamic shifted. The tension that had driven them here began to unravel. There was vulnerability in facing their decisions, a reflective moment that laid them bare under starlit skies. To fight back would mean choosing a path of hardship, and authenticity was whispering gently to them now. "Let me show you something," George said suddenly, surprising them both. He turned, gesturing for them to follow him back into the barn. Skeptical but intrigued, Tommy and Liz exchanged glances before reluctantly following. Inside the barn, George illuminated a small room, tools hung neatly on the walls, machinery in varying states of repair lining the floors. "This is what hard work looks like," he explained, a hint of pride glistening in his voice. "These tools, this land, they've brought me a life of hard-earned satisfaction. I've spent years fixing machines, learning from mistakes. It's what separates those who take from those who build." He paused, looking intently at them. Tommy felt a stir in his heart, the weight of what he had done pressing heavier than before. Liz took a step forward, intrigue clear in her brimming eyes. "Absolutely." "But it takes dedication," George replied, an earnestness in his demeanor. They stood there, wrapped in the warmth of a new possibility. Two desperate souls offered a chance for transformation, standing on the precipice of change. The fear and desperation began to fade, replaced with something far more powerful, hope. George asked, his eyes assessing, welcoming, "You're welcome here to learn, to grow." After a moment that felt like an eternity, Tommy stepped closer, the tears threatening to spill from his eyes. "We never wanted to be this way." Liz nodded, the heaviness in her chest lifting. George smiled, a flickering light igniting in the dimness surrounding them. Yes, as the sun began to break over the horizon, painting the sky with vibrant hues, Tommy and Liz felt as if a weight had been lifted from their shoulders. The old boundaries had crumbled, replaced by the promises of a life built on hard work and respect. They stepped outside the barn together, side by side with George, drawing in the fresh morning air, feeling its warmth wrap around them like a hug. This farm, once a scene of desperation, now brimmed with possibility. As they stood together, a sense of peace settled over them. Both Tommy and Liz realized that true freedom didn't come from stealing. It came from the strength to change, to embrace new paths, and to rise from the ashes of their past. The field stretched out before them, a blank canvas upon which they would paint their future. And in that new dawn, they found not just redemption, but the courage to reclaim their lives one hardworking day at a time. In the heart of the farmer, they discovered not only hope, but the undeniable power of transformation, even in the darkest of nights. The night was unusually quiet, the kind of stillness that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath. In the rural expanse, a farmer's barn stood looming against the inky sky, shadows flickering like whispers of old ghosts. Somewhere nearby, a flicker of movement broke the surface of that stillness. Two figures emerged from the thick woods, hearts racing, eyes scanning the surroundings. They were here for a reason, and they were intent on sticking to the shadows. Tommy glanced at Liz, his partner in desperation, a tight grin spreading across his face. "This is it. This will set us up for a long time." They had been plotting this for weeks, their excitement mixed with an ever-present fear. Each moment felt charged, alive with possibility and danger. We slip in quietly, grab the old tractor, and we're out before anyone even knows we were here, Tommy whispered, urgency heavy in his voice. Liz nodded, adrenaline coursing through her veins, fueling her resolve. She wasn't just in it for the money. There was a desperate need for a change, a longing to escape the crumbling life they had both found themselves caught in. The air was thick with anticipation as they approached the barn's old wooden doors. Her heart hammered against her chest as they pushed the doors open, a creaking protest echoing into the night. Inside the barn was a treasure trove of rust and memories, shadows dancing in the dim light that filtered through the cracks in the walls. But as they stepped inside, a chill of unease trickled down Liz's spine. It was eerily quiet, too quiet. Stay sharp. Let's move, Tommy urged, already heading toward the tractor shrouded in dust and history. Outside, George the farmer was restless. He had felt something was off the moment the sun dipped below the horizon. Years of living on this land had sharpened his instincts, attuning him to the subtle shifts that heralded danger. As the moon cast eerie shadows across the fields, George wondered if his intuition was just paranoia fueled by whispers he had heard at the diner. Rumors of thieves scouting old farms like his had circulated, but he never thought it would happen to him. Taking a deep breath, he pulled on his jacket and grabbed his flashlight, stepping outside into the cool night air. The familiar sounds of his farm were absent, replaced by an unsettling silence that gnawed at him. Something compelled him to check the barn, the very heart of his livelihood. Back inside, Tommy had reached the tractor, his hand hovering over the old metal. Look at this beauty, he murmured to Liz, a glimmer of hope sparking in his eyes. This will sell for a decent amount, just think about it. As excitement danced in the air, Liz kept glancing back toward the barn doors, annoying anxiety curling in her stomach. Maybe we should hurry, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Just a few more minutes. We need to get this thing running, Tommy insisted, losing himself in the moment, the smell of rust and old gasoline intoxicating him. The quiet tension suddenly cracked as a sound reverberated from the outside. A nearby gate creaked, echoing through the night in a way that made Liz's heart leap into her throat. She blurted out, eyes wide. Keep it together, Tommy replied, but fear had begun to seep through the cracks. They were deep in this, and retreat wasn't an option now. He pushed the throttle, hoping desperately that the engine would roar to life and whisk them away. But then came a voice, low and steady, slicing through the air like a knife. Both Tommy and Liz froze, terror rooting them to the spot. George stood at the entrance, framed by moonlight, his flashlight beam glaring down at them like a spotlight on stage. The old farmer was a wall of authority, eyes narrowed, unwavering. Get out of my barn, George commanded, his tone firm yet calm. Wait. We can explain, Tommy stuttered, his bravado crumbling under the weight of George's stare. George pressed, stepping further inside, the shadows wrapping around him like an impenetrable cloak. Stealing, no, we were just, Liz began, her mind racing for a plausible excuse, but George's eyes silenced her. Don't try to talk your way out of this. You're here with the intent to take what's mine. Tommy's mind raced. We're just desperate. We thought we could get something to sell. Desperate, George echoed, his voice dropping in tone. I know what that's like. For a moment, the air between them hung thick with tension. George's gaze softened, revealing a glimpse of the man behind the anger, a man who had fought hard to cultivate this land, who understood struggle. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. You can walk away. The truth of his words reached deeper than they expected, cutting through the bravado that had brought them here. They were staring down the barrel of a decision, and Liz felt it. Tommy interjected, panicking. It can be, George replied firmly, a flicker of conviction lighting up his features. Every minute you spend in here, every moment you dedicate to taking from others, is a moment wasted. Inside the barn, the stubborn echo of George's words hovered in the air, growing heavier by the second. Liz's heart raced as she surveyed their surroundings, the realization that the old farmer was right slowly sinking in. This wasn't just about a tractor, it was about choices, integrity, and the paths they had been taught to take. I don't know if I can just walk away, she admitted, stepping forward with the weight of everything she had ever felt. Tommy's face twisted in frustration. What do you mean another way? We're already here. The wave of desperation crashed over them again as the gravity of their situation settled in. Liz looked at George, her mind swirling. George hesitated, weighing his options. I'll give you a choice. You can take that tractor, or I can show you how to repair things, work here, and make a real living. The air around them thickened, each word heavy with a promise, an opportunity for redemption. Tommy and Liz exchanged glances, hearts pounding with uncertainty. Tommy asked, bewildered, because I understand what it's like to be in a place with no options, George replied. And I've dedicated my life to this land. I've worked for every single thing I have, and I want to help you dig yourselves out of the hole you're in. A flicker of hope ignited in Liz's chest. This was more than she had bargained for, more than just an escape plan. It was a lifeline, a chance to rewrite their stories and build their futures on their terms. George asked, resolve etched into his voice. Tommy felt torn, the weight of the decision pressing heavily on him. I thought we could just grab something quick, get out, and make a run for it, he admitted, fear and shame mingling in his voice. But maybe. George nodded slowly, his gaze steady. It won't be easy. Liz took a deep breath, her heart steadying. I want to try. A A flicker of emotion passed between the three of them, a realignment of fates. Tommy nodded slowly as acceptance washed over him. Yeah, with that, the tension in the barn began to dissipate. The shadows started to pull away, revealing the warmth of opportunity and a new beginning. As the sun began to rise, casting golden light through the barn slats, the trio stood united, ready to take that first step toward a life defined by hard work and resilience. Together they would explore tools and machines, rebuild not just the tractor but their lives, brick by brick, forging a future grounded in honesty and integrity. The morning air filled with promise, washing away the remnants of fear that had brought them here. With every wrench turned and every hour spent in the fields, they would plant the seeds of a new life, not just for themselves, but for their dreams, hopes, and futures yet to come. And in the heart of that old barn, the echoes of their past faded slowly, replaced by the sound of laughter, work, and the undeniable spirit of redemption that now breathed new life into every corner of that once quiet farm. As the sun rose higher in the sky, illuminating paths of possibility, they knew together they could write a different story, one filled with resilience, hard-earned hope, and endless potential. The night was still, but it throbbed with anticipation. Underneath the thick blanket of stars, two figures slipped through the shadows, their breaths quick and shallow. Tommy and Liz had spent weeks dreaming about this moment, poring over plans that had come to life in hushed whispers and late-night discussions. They were after something they believed could change their lives, an old tractor stored away in a barn long forgotten but filled with untapped potential. "It's now or never," Tommy whispered, his eyes gleaming with a mix of excitement and fear. "Just imagine what we could do with it." Liz hesitated for a moment, glancing around at the quiet farm that loomed before them, a lone sentinel against the dark sky. Every shadow felt alive, whispering secrets of the land. She asked, doubt flickering like a candle flame. "We can't go back, we need this," he reassured her, his voice edged with desperation. With that, they crept toward the barn, its wooden doors yawning open like a mouth ready to swallow them whole. The familiar scent of old hay and rust enveloped them as they entered, each creak of the floorboards singing a warning that both thrilled and terrified them. But outside, George the farmer sat in his favorite old chair, a single lamp casting a warm glow against the wooden walls of his home. He had spent long days in the fields, tending to crops that had fed his family for generations. Yet tonight, an unsettling feeling gnawed at him. He had heard whispers at the diner, rumors of thieves targeting farms around town. Deciding he couldn't ignore it, George rose, rolling his shoulders back as he slipped on his worn jacket. He'd built this life with blood, sweat, and tears, and the thought of losing it to desperate hands sent his heart racing. Grabbing his flashlight, he stepped outside into the cool night air, eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of intruders. Inside the barn, the air felt thick with tension. Tommy directed the dim beam of his flashlight toward the old tractor, excitement bubbling to the surface. "Look at this beauty," he said, running a hand over the rusted metal. But Liz's stomach twisted into knots. She whispered, glancing nervously toward the barn door. "Stop worrying, we're fine," Tommy insisted. But just as he finished speaking, the creak of a floorboard above sent a jolt of panic through them both. Time seemed to freeze. "It's nothing," Tommy murmured, forcing a smile, though excitement mixed with fear in his chest. He refocused on the tractor and began fiddling with the ignition, hoping that nostalgia could still breathe life into the old machine. But outside, George's instincts blared like alarms. Someone was in his barn. He could feel it in his bones, that sharp, jarring presence of intrusion that made his heart pound. He took a steadying breath, determination settling deep within him like an anchor. He wouldn't let this go unchecked. Moving swiftly, he approached the barn, flashlight gripped tightly in his hand. As Tommy turned the ignition switch, the ancient machine roared to life, breaking the stillness of the night like a thunderclap. Liz jumped, her heart racing. She urged, panic lacing her voice. What had once felt exhilarating now felt dangerously reckless, but Tommy grinned, exhilarated. He called out over the noise, feeling the rush of adrenaline. The thrill of the moment dulled his senses. Then came the voice, deep and firm, slicing through the noise like a knife. Both of them froze, hearts thudding in their chests. George stood silhouetted in the doorway, an imposing figure outlined by the moonlight. His flashlight illuminated his face, revealing a calm authority that commanded respect. "Get out of my barn," he said, his voice gravelly but steady. Tommy's confidence evaporated. We're just," he stuttered, trying to string together the right words, but fear tangled their thoughts. "You're stealing from me," George replied, stepping further into the barn, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the dust and chaos of machinery around them. "No," Liz protested, desperation spilling from her lips. "We didn't want any trouble," George interjected, his voice sharp. The weight of the encounter hit them hard. This was more than just a broken tractor. It was a challenge, a struggle between desperation and integrity. "We thought we could fix it up," Tommy finally managed, the words spilling out like rivers of regret. "We just need the money, okay?" George took a breath, the tension in the air heavy. He could see the fear in their eyes, the desperation that had brought them here. He felt a pang of empathy, a mirror reflecting the struggles he had known in his own life. "Listen," George said, his tone softening slightly. I get it, times are tough. I'm not here to demonize you. Tommy and Liz exchanged puzzled glances, grappling with a storm of emotions. Tommy asked, the fight beginning to drain from his voice. Help each other, George proposed. You don't have to live like this. As the words hung between them, the air shifted. George had drawn a line, presented an option that didn't involve destruction but cooperation. Liz asked, her voice trembling. Because we're all human, George replied, his eyes steady. We all make mistakes. I've had my share of close calls, too. Tommy felt something shift inside of him, an ember of hope flickering against the winds of despair. Yes, George affirmed, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth, but it'll take effort. Liz nodded slowly, stepping forward. We can try. Just like that, the dynamics began to weave a new story. George led them deeper into the barn, illuminating the tools and broken machinery that filled the space. This, he gestured, is what hard work looks like. Their breathing steadied, uncertainty morphing into possibility. If they embraced this, it could change everything. At first, both Tommy and Liz hesitated but felt the pull of a different life, one where they would earn their way. Let's do this, Tommy said finally, resolve breaking through. As they began to understand the tools, they slowly fortified their spirits. George taught them about mechanics, farming, and the value of hard work. Day by day, the barn transformed. Together, they rebuilt the old tractor, not just a machine, but a symbol of second chances. With each sunrise, Tommy and Liz poured themselves into learning, their energy infectious as they laughed and shared stories with George. The divisions between them began to dissolve beneath the warmth of camaraderie, a bond forged in shared experiences and dedication. They faced early struggles, the weight of their past hovering like a specter, but where before there was desperation, now there was purpose. George guided them with steady hands, teaching them to take pride in what they could achieve together. One afternoon, after hours of working in the hot sun, Tommy wiped the sweat from his brow and looked at Liz, who was grinning ear to ear as they painted the tractor a bright, cheery red. He said, shaking his head in disbelief. I honestly can't, Liz laughed, brushing dirt from her hands. With each passing day, they forged a new existence, a life filled with purpose, laughter, and dignity. They learned the intricacies of farming, the delicate balance of growing and nurturing crops, cultivating not just the land but their own self-worth. As weeks turned into months, the sun warmed their backs and the fields flourished under their care. They planted seeds not just in the soil but within themselves, seeds of resilience, hope, and dreams carried forward. The local community noticed their transformation. No longer perceived as lost souls lurching towards crime, Tommy and Liz became a part of the town's fabric, working hard alongside George, lending hands wherever they could. Then came the day when they decided to show George the masterpiece they had created together. The old tractor, now gleaming with a fresh coat of paint, stood proudly in the sun, a testament to the work they had put in, not just as farmers, but as individuals striving for redemption. Here it is, Liz announced, her voice trembling with excitement and pride. George stepped forward, eyes lighting up as he looked at the machine that had once seemed like a symbol of ruin, now standing as a beacon of rebirth. You did this, he said, almost in disbelief. Tommy beamed, warmth enveloping him. We couldn't have done it without you. Together, George reminded them, nodding, we built something real. In that moment, they understood that it wasn't just the tractor that had been rebuilt. It was their lives, their hope, and their future. They could grow and cultivate dreams, tending to them like the crops in the field patiently, but with determination. As the sun began to set, painting the skies in shades of orange and pink, the three of them stood side by side, watching the horizon stretch out before them. They felt the weight of their journey, the trials, the mistakes, and the triumphs that had led them here, culminating in a shared bond that surpassed their previous lives. What had started as mere desperation evolved into a journey full of purpose and resilience, a shift toward understanding that life's true riches lay not in what they took, but what they built. With laughter ringing in the air and fields stretching endlessly before them, they knew together they could weather any storm. In the heart of that old barn, darkness had transformed into light, a shared vision, a new beginning, and a testament to the power of redemption that lived in the hearts of those willing to fight for their dreams. The moon hung high in the night sky, casting an eerie glow over the sprawling farmland that stretched into the horizon. A gentle breeze rustled through the tall grass, but the stillness of the night was interrupted by the faint sound of footsteps. Two figures crept cautiously through the shadows, hearts pounding in their chests, the kind of pounding that felt like a countdown to disaster. Tommy and Liz were here for one reason only, an old tractor buried deep in the barn. Remember, in and out quickly, Tommy whispered, a mix of excitement and fear coursing through him. Just a few minutes. Liz nodded, her eyes wide, scanning the darkness like a hawk. They had talked about this moment for weeks, but as they drew closer to the barn, the reality of their actions sank in. What if the farmer is still awake? She murmured, doubt creeping into her voice. Don't think about that, Tommy urged, his voice tight with the tension of the moment. They approached the barn's creaky door, the wood worn from years of weathering storms. The door opened with a low groan and they stepped inside, the rich smell of hay and rust wrapping around them like a comforting blanket. but underneath that comforting scent was a sense of foreboding, a whisper of warning that flickered in Liz's gut. Inside, the shadows danced, illuminated only by the faint sliver of moonlight infiltrating the barn's cracks. Their eyes fell on the old tractor, a relic of days gone by, its faded blue paint peeling like old skin. "This is it," Tommy breathed, a grin spreading across his face as he made his way toward the machine. But just as he reached out to touch it, an unexpected sound shattered the silence, a rustling from outside, sharp and unnerving. Liz froze, her heart racing faster now. She whispered. "Just the wind or something," Tommy replied, though his bravado was starting to waver. His hand trembled slightly as he gripped the tractor, the thrill of the moment now tinged with uncertainty. Meanwhile, in the farmhouse not far away, George the farmer sat alert in his favorite old chair, a single lamp illuminating the pages of a book that had long since lost his attention. Something felt off. It was that gut feeling, that instinct honed over many years of living on the land. He tried to brush it off but couldn't shake the feeling that someone was lingering too close to his home. Just then, he heard a faint creak echoing through the silence. Intrigued but cautious, George stood up and moved toward the window, peering out into the darkness. His eyes narrowed, focusing on the silhouette of the barn. Despite the late hour, the door was slightly ajar, and that gut feeling surged again, more insistent this time. Wasting no time, George grabbed a flashlight resting on the table and headed out. Each step was careful, his boots crunching softly on the gravel path. He moved with purpose, the light from his flashlight cutting through the dark like a beacon of justice. He had poured his life into this farm, and he wouldn't allow anyone to take what was his. Inside the barn, Tommy had found the ignition wires. His hands fumbled as the engine turned over, throwing up a thick cloud of dust as the old machine sputtered to life. The deafening roar cut through the quiet night, shaking Liz from her daze. She yelled, panic seeping into her words as her heart raced even faster, but excitement blinded Tommy. "Just a second, let him come," Tommy shot back, desperation tinging his voice. Suddenly, the barn door swung open with a creak that echoed like thunder. George stood there, flashlight beam aimed at them with an intensity that felt like ice water washing over their adrenaline-fueled excitement. He asked, his voice calm but laden with authority. Tommy froze, eyes locked with the farmer's, heart pounding furiously in his chest. "We're just looking for something," he stammered, trying to regain the upper hand. George replied, stepping inside, his silhouette framed against the backdrop of the moonlit sky. Liz felt the weight of the world crashing down around her. "We didn't mean any harm, we just thought we could take it and sell it." The plea spilled from her lips, wrapped in desperation. George took a moment studying them. The girl looked terrified, her face pale, while the boy seemed defiant, but she could see cracks forming. "This isn't a solution, you don't have to resort to this," he said, his voice steady as if he was trying to reach into their hearts. "I understand desperation. You think taking is the only way out." Caught off guard, Tommy glanced at Liz, the raw truth of George's words hitting home. For a moment, fear wavered before the unexpected flicker of empathy in the farmer's voice. "You didn't have to come here and destroy my things to find a way out," Liz asked, her voice trembling, fear and hope battling for dominance. "Let me show you," George urged, a calm conviction settling over the tension in the air. "You can work for me, learn how to earn your keep." Tommy shook his head, disbelief flooding his senses. George replied. That simple declaration hung in the air, a second chance dangling like a ripe fruit just within reach. Liz felt something shift within her, a flicker of warmth igniting in the darkness surrounding them. Could they really step off this path of desperation? Tommy hesitated, fear swirling in his mind, but as he looked at Liz, he saw the same flicker of hope growing in her eyes. Liz said, the words rushing out, "We can learn, we can really start fresh." George smiled, a wave of relief washing over him. "Then let's get to work. You can start learning what it means to build something rather than take it." Days turned into weeks as they began to work alongside George. They learned how to till the soil, plant seeds, and maintain the old machinery that surrounded them. Underneath the watchful eye of the farmer, they transformed from desperate intruders into dedicated apprentices. As time wore on, Liz and Tommy felt the weight of their past decisions lift, each act of labor pulling them away from a lifestyle once shrouded in darkness. They spent early mornings planting crops, laughing as the cool morning air crisped their skin. They shared stories and dreams of the future over long days spent in the fields. Despite their challenges, there was something liberating about learning and earning their way. Each completed task brought a sense of purpose they had only dared to dream of before. They were rebuilding not only the crops and equipment, but something within themselves. But just as they began to find their footing, change loomed like a storm on the horizon. One evening, as they gathered tools after a long day, a familiar sound interrupted the calm rumble of engines and loud voices echoed across the fields. Tommy's heart dropped. He asked, looking anxiously at George, who seemed unfazed. "Just the local folks," George replied dismissively, but there was an edge of tension in his voice. Liz stood still, her gut tightening. Before George could answer, a group of men pulled up in a truck, laughing loudly, their voices cutting through the quiet like knives. one of them shouted, swaggering towards the barn. Tommy and Liz exchanged worried glances, the warmth of their newfound life suddenly overshadowed by the looming presence of danger. The men approached with a boisterous confidence, their faces twisted into grins that sent chills down Liz's spine. "Hey, we heard you were growing something out here," one of them jeered, pointing at Tommy and Liz. "What a couple of losers. What do you think you're doing?" George stood tall, a steel resolve anchoring him against the tide of mockery. "Leave them out of this," he warned, his voice steady, demanding respect. But the attitude from the newcomers only intensified. Another man laughed, swaggering closer. Tommy felt the tension escalate, rage boiling up inside him. "You can't talk to us like that." The laughter erupted, ringing out like cruel music against the barn's walls. Doing something real, like stealing tractors. The analogy was too real, too close to home. Liz felt a surge of anger bubble up, but fear mingled with it. She shot back, clenching her fists. "We're here to work." Just then, one of the newcomers stepped forward, eyes dark and menacing, leaning too close to George. "You think you can teach them to be better? Life doesn't work that way." In that moment, the air crackled with potential violence, and George felt it, a protective surge coursing through his veins. Back off. But as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the barn, the men squared up, their laughter fading into smirks. This was a standoff, a confrontation that would determine the fate of everything they had fought for. The fear washed over Tommy and Liz, their hearts racing, each pulse echoing the harsh reality of their past. The farmer stood to protect what he believed in, while the others stood ready to dismantle everything they had built. As the tension thickened in the air, it felt like time itself was holding its breath. Every instinct screamed for the trio to run, to flee and salvage whatever they could. But something rooted them to the ground, the need to stand firm against adversity. In that uncertain moment, as anger danced in the air alongside fear, they knew their lives were at a tipping point. Would they allow their past to unravel their hard-fought future, or would they stand shoulder to shoulder against the storm closing in around them? The answers lay just beyond the field, a battlefield that would soon reveal the strength of their resolve and the power embedded in each choice they made. And as George faced down the impending danger, he felt the energy shift, the pull of fate settling heavily upon their shoulders. Would they rise to the occasion when everything was on the line, or would the storm tear through the bonds they had forged, leaving nothing but a scattering of broken dreams? In that uncertain dark, with tension ready to break like a tidal wave, the answer hung precariously in the air, leading them down a path they could only choose in the moments that lay ahead.